Hey, everybody, welcome to Fictionology. This is Gideon,
And this is Bardicans.
and we're coming to you live from the COVID bunker, riding out the remainder of the quarantine in style and certainly seclusion.
That's right. And hopefully, we don't have to keep saying that line over and over in the future. Hopefully, this goes away eventually.
Yeah, hopefully. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call wishful thinking. We'll probably be here a decade from now, so best buckle in. So, on that depressing note, I think that we decided to throw everybody a curveball and talk about a topic, blow the dust off a topic that we have not discussed in quite some time, which is Star Wars. Specifically the Mandalorian. I would say that we in the last few days we saw what I would argue is the most pivotal episode of the series so far. What do you think?
Oh, certainly. And it just jumped right into it, didn't it?
It did. It did. Random episode in the middle of a season. It was not our intention to cover every episode of The Mandalorian for a variety of reasons, but the biggest one being, it's a slow burn spaghetti western, which is how I've described it in previous episodes. And I think it's meant to be watched as a whole, like a very, very, very long movie. And I don't think every hour, at least for our purposes, merits its own discussion and analysis. There are a lot of other people doing that on the internet, doing a great job.
Sure.
But yet this episode, I think, for a variety of reasons, merits a discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, a lot of the episodes in between the one we covered, initially, just things happened, but they didn't necessarily need commentary. They weren't. It was very slow, and it almost felt like nothing happened, even though things happened. It was
Right,
setting up for things in the future.
right. And I think this is the first big payoff moment, certainly of this
Right.
season, and perhaps really of both seasons combined. So I think with that being said, I think that we should jump into it and discuss Chapter 13, The Jedi, of Season 2 of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, let's do it.
I would say just a quick recap, and I'm sure everybody, all 12 of our viewers, have watched the episode, but a quick recap. After several stops along the way, each one more disastrous than the last, the titular Mandalorian and the child, whose name we now know, we have learned the name.
Spoiler alert.
We'll get to that in a minute. They finally make it to the, I think it's the forest planet Corvus, and the capital city of, it's like Calavan or Caladan, I think it is. Not much of a city, more like a very small village.
Right.
Keeping in
It was Caladan, I think.
It is Caladan. Okay. It keeps with the Star Wars tradition where basically everything outside of Coruscant, like all the scale is very small. Like all these planets, you know what I mean? When they talk about going to the capital city, it's like you can see one side of the city and the other. You know what I'm saying? It's not
right.
It's
like
more
a
like
small
a
village. Yes.
right. It's more like a Middle Eastern or Middle Ages like bazaar. It's just it's very crowded, very small. And not particularly overwhelming. But it's supposedly the capital of the city, and it does certainly see a lot of action and a lot of foot traffic in this episode.
Yes.
I thought it would be many more episodes before we finally got there. In fact, you and I were making a running joke in the last several episodes, like, I wonder where they'll have to go next in order to get to the thing, to get to the thing, to get to the thing, to get to planet Corvus. But they made it there. They threw us a curveball. We got there. And what's interesting is actually before the Mandalorian got there, the first scene was Ahsoka Tano, emerging from the fog, from almost like it was a meta introduction. She emerged from the fog of animation into the reality of live action. And it was quite a memorable introduction. Again, we'll get into that later. It set the stage up between a standoff between Ahsoka and the magistrate of the capital city, Morgan Elsbeth. yeah, so then shortly after, the Mandalorian shows up with the child. He encounters the magistrate. The magistrate has a staff of Beskar. He says, "Hey, look, I've got a Jedi problem. There's a Jedi who's being a pain in my ass, and I need you to take care of
Kill
it.
him.
And in return, I'll give you the staff of Beskar." And so the Mandalorian shoots her in the head and takes the staff and leaves. Just
Or
kidding. Doesn't do
that's
that.
what he should have done.
He agrees to the contract, encounters Ahsoka, introduces Ahsoka to the child. They form an alliance to overthrow the magistrate and liberate the city. It goes according to plan, I would think, overall. We get another name drop of a major Star Wars character, Grand Admiral Thrawn, who is apparently the master of the magistrate. And it sounds like Ahsoka's on the hunt for him. And I think, if I remember correctly, the last thing is now the Mandalorian is taking the child to another planet for another purpose. So that's basically the overall plot recap, which we'll dive into, more substantively here in just a bit. Do you want to add anything to that, Bardikins?
The only thing I'd like to add is that your quick recaps ends up being over 3 minutes long usually.
I know. Imagine. But that was actually pretty trim, I think, for the most part. That was
I think
2
so.
minutes.
I didn't know you were recapping the whole thing, but that's cool. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I like it.
So I
yeah,
think,
so
go ahead.
What should we do first? Should we just do like overall impressions, then spoilers?
Yeah, for me, let's do the overall impression. For me, this was the most interesting episode of The Mandalorian so far. I have not been shy about my personal opinion, which I think, as we know, online and offline friends tend to disagree. But I'm not overwhelmed by The Mandalorian. I don't think it's bad. I think it's decidedly mediocre. I think it's got great budget, great set design, and an interesting premise, but it's so slow that it doesn't keep my interest, and I don't think there's much by way of individual episode rewatch value. And that may change, and hopefully it does, but so far, I have not rewatched a single episode of The Mandalorian. This one is probably the first one that I would be willing to rewatch. It's a very tight episode. It's interesting right from the word go, all the way up to the end credits. And it's not breakneck in its pace, but it is noticeably faster, and it's more resonant in what it does and what it accomplishes. It's also got the benefit of Ahsoka. This is this is a capstone moment for Star Wars in general. I mean, usually the live action world of Star Wars and the more obscure stuff like the television series, and even more obscure than that, the graphic novels, the video games, they supposedly share a universe, but it's usually the case that you don't see much by way of transition from one into the other. So this is huge, right? I think the closest thing to a live action cameo for Ahsoka came in episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, when Rey is, lying on her back trying to make contact with Jedi past as the Emperor, zaps the Resistance fleet. She is one of the voices that you hear. Ahsoka is one of the voices that the audience hears contacting Rey, which suggests she's dead by the time of Rise of Skywalker. Though Dave Filoni, I know he said on the record, well, that's not necessarily true. And
it's Dave Filoni. So.
Right. Filoni would be reluctant to kill her off anyway. I mean, she could die as utterly as the Emperor did, thrown down a reactor core and, explodes, and then everything around her explodes. And he'd still be like, well, I mean, we never saw the body because it was vaporized. I mean, is that really the end? So we know he's pretty reluctant to kill her off in any situation, but to see her in the flesh is a huge moment. A lot of people who have been fans of this character for the last 12 years, when she debuted in the Clone Wars CGI show in 2008, she was a huge character. I mean, And she had mixed reactions. I mean, audiences didn't, immediately love her all the way around. Like, it wasn't unanimous. But over time, she really grew. She became a hugely popular, iconic character in her own right. So to bring her in, I mean, love it or hate it, right or wrong, it's a huge moment. And in a meta sense, I think it's a good for Star Wars. This idea that they're willing to trade characters and transition characters from one medium into another. So yeah, that's why I it's definitely the most memorable episode for me so far, and
Sure.
probably the first one that I would rewatch personally. So,
Sure.
what about you? What do you think?
No, I think I agree with that. I think like overall impressions of the episode, it's probably one of my favorite right off the bat. You get more of what I talked about in the past about the atmosphere. They've done a very incredible job with the atmosphere, and this time the atmosphere kind of worked with the camera and the introduction of Ahsoka, right? With the fog,
Oh,
and
huge! Yep,
yeah,
definitely.
or the mist, or whatever you want to call it.
The fog
And
mist,
I thought, yeah, right, fog
the
mist.
the Mog.
Oh yeah, Mog. Final Fantasy fans would be happy at that.
Did I make a reference to a thing?
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't come up with that. That's
No,
stupid.
no.
Whatever.
The
Anyway,
Japanese
carry
beat
on.
you there.
Then we're gonna
But
call it the Fist. The fog and mist. The Fist.
that
Anyway, carry
hasn't
on.
been said before.
Certainly not in that context. Carry on.
Sure. But yeah, anyways, basically, I thought it just came out very, it just came out running, right? And it basically didn't stop. It had a lot of very good moments. And I really appreciated yet another well built set with this. What was it, like a mining or a factory town or something like that?
That's what they hinted. I mean, we didn't see a factory, but I think if you looked very carefully at the walls and when they did the exterior shots of the
Mm-hmm.
walls that encircle the city, you see like smokestacks in the background, and references are made by Ahsoka, I think, to the Magistrate being part of a production that essentially scourges planets
Right.
for material to build the Imperial Starfleet. So the implication I got is that it's some sort of factory town, but we didn't actually see the factory proper.
Sure, but you did see the effects on the planet, presumably, because it looked dead, right? And it
Yes,
looked
it
like it
did.
was dying or dead. Maybe that's how it always looks, but I doubt it. I think they were going for the,
Either that
the
or it's a very harsh autumn. It's a very harsh winter
That's true.
on
Could be.
Corvus. But yeah,
Could
that
be.
was the implication that the Magistrate, essentially tortured the life literally out of the planet for whatever purpose. So
Sure. But yeah, I basically liked that. It kept up the pace a bit. It had its slow moments with the scene and with the child,
Yeah.
and they're in the forest and everything.
right.
A little bit slow, but I think it was fine, right?
Yeah,
They
no,
were-
yeah. So what I like about that is, I don't think I don't think a thing to be entertaining, even Star Wars, which is popcorn space fantasy. I mean, at its best, it has some resonant spiritual, emotional themes, but you know, Star Wars often doesn't take itself too seriously. So that said, it doesn't need to be one speeder chase, one pod racing chase, one lightsaber
Sure.
duel after another. You do want moments, like pregnant moments, for things to breathe, and like dialogue, expository scenes, and quiet moments. It just it doesn't need to be all one or the other. So even those slow moments, it kept my attention. It kept my interest, which
absolutely.
is good.
And the last thing I'll say is that the later part of the episode where the fights took place and everything in the duel that we'll get into, I thought they were pretty well done.
Yeah.
And everything. So I really appreciated the episode. It does have some implications that could be negative on the
Yeah.
story, right? And I
Yeah.
think we'll both talk about that. But overall, I like the episode. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorites immediately.
Yeah, it probably is my favorite. And you know, I mean, in that it's the most memorable, and again the one that I would soonest rewatch.
Sure.
No, I can empathize with much of what you said. For me, you know, just again diving right into it, that first scene was excellent. It was very
Yeah.
moody, very, it was attention getting right off the bat, and it definitely. So, which you may or may not be aware of this because you don't stick as close to Star Wars as I do, but technically, at least based on what we know from Star Wars: The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, Ahsoka never officially reclaimed her Jedi title. At the end of the Clone Wars, season 5 of the Clone Wars, she ends her commission with the Jedi Order. She leaves the Jedi Order formally.
Does she hand over her lightsabers?
Yes, she hands over her lightsabers to Anakin, and because, long story short, they almost like kick her out, and then she declines to return, and she breaks off connection with the Jedi.
Yeah, I remember that part.
And then season 7, the final season of the Clone Wars, she comes back, and Anakin gives her lightsabers back, but she still is not technically a Jedi. She's basically like an outside contractor that they're dealing with to, you know, for whatever reason they need her to go help liberate Mandalore from Darth Maul. What?
A little bit of a side point on that. I wonder if they built her a statue in the library.
Oh yeah, like
Dooku,
the Lost 20. Yeah, the Lost 20. Yeah, which she would be the 21st. Yeah, that'd be cool. If they wanted to, they could spite Dooku, knock his bust off the plinth, and put hers down instead. But, you know, honestly, they probably didn't have the time because shortly thereafter, Order 66 happened.
That's right.
So, you know, it might have been one of those things where they finally got it done. They take off the cloth that covers it. You know what I'm saying? Unveil it. Oh, voila. And then whoever did it gets shot by clone troopers.
Right. And then Anakin comes and
knocks it over. Knocks it over.
Right.
And the last thing that this person sees is this project he's been working on for months just shatter right in front of him. And that's the real tragedy of Order 66. That's headcanon to me. That is canon in my head. And hopefully,
and I've adopted one day, that canon.
Yep. Yes. Yep. That deserves its own Wikipedia page.
There you go.
But anyway, yeah, so she never reclaimed her Jedi title, even during Star Wars Rebels. She was involved with fledgling Jedi Order stuff, you know, and training nascent Jedi like Ezra Bridger, who's the protagonist of Star Wars Rebels. But she in fact, she very emphatically says, I remember this now that I'm thinking about it, she confronts Vader in Star Wars Rebels with season 2. And she realizes he's Anakin Skywalker. And Vader says, you know, Anakin Skywalker is dead. I destroyed him. And she says, then I will avenge his death. And Vader mocks her. He says, revenge isn't the Jedi way. And then she says, I'm no Jedi, and pulls out her lightsabers and attacks him. And so unless something has changed between Rebels and Mandalorian, she's still technically not a Jedi. She agrees with many of their ideals. She certainly retains the knowledge, you know, but she is a rogue agent. She is unaffiliated officially with the Jedi Order. And the reason I think that's pertinent is because that's not addressed one way or another here. Like, she still answers. Like, people call her Jedi. The Magistrate calls her a Jedi. She, the Mandalorian also calls her a Jedi. And she doesn't deny it. But she doesn't claim the title either. But what's interesting to me is she doesn't fight like one in that opening scene. I mean, she's hunting these guys. I mean, I'm not going to say she's not nearly as brutal as Vader is, you know, in Rogue One and stuff like that. I mean, she's not like viciously hunting these folks down, but this isn't just self-defense. I mean, I distinctly recall she cut people down in sneak attacks, you know.
Well, she was coming out of the mist, right?
Right. Like decapitating people, amputating them, impaling them, and then receding into the Mog, or the fist, as we call it, and moving on to the next target. Now, there were also moments where she spared people, like when they dropped their, like there was at one point in the episode
On the
where she
wall.
jumped, on the wall, where the guy drops his gun and backs away, and she smiles and winks at him and lets him go. So it's not full on Sith. But there's moral ambiguity there. She's not just deflecting shots. She's not letting them always make the first move. And she's like preemptively going after these people, these guys, and cutting them down in a very calculated, predatory way. That's not something that I would expect from Obi-Wan Kenobi or from Luke Skywalker.
You may expect it from Anakin, though.
Well, no, because these were adults. He only does that with children and younglings.
That's true.
Remember?
Oh, yeah. and sand people.
And sand. Well, he hates sand.
That's true.
He does. Yeah. But I mean, that was a very memorable, immediate. That stood out to me. Like they didn't have to draw overt attention to it. Like I was able to pick up on that pretty quickly. And it may have been a total accident. I wouldn't put it past, the Star Wars crew. Some of the best things that come out of Star Wars were total accidents. So I'm not going to sit here and say it was deliberate. It just seems like a deliberate artistic choice to me to show Ahsoka fight that way.
Right. But then at the same time, when they're in the forest, she kind of works with the child, who's named now, right?
You want to go ahead and drop it?
Grogu.
Which sounds like an Eastern European soup or something like. I'm
some people
on
were
the
saying
example.
It's like a Hutt's name,
Oh, yes, that'd be even more appropriate. Yeah, Grogu the Hutt. I was
Right.
thinking like goulash or something, but yeah, it's. Some people are freaking out about the name online, and I think it's like standard Star Wars fare.
It's whatever. Everybody's named something really weird in Star Wars, and it just works because they just throw letters together and whatever. You know, not a big deal.
Yeah, throw some vowels and a consonant, together, and voila.
Voila. Yeah, right. Yeah. And so in the forest, when she's kind of not really training but kind of testing Grogu, she uses a lot of things that the Jedi would have used, right? Including the part where she's like, I sense much fear, quoting Yoda, right?
Right. Yeah, so you see the influence, like she'll never excise the Jedi influence from her, and she certainly hews more closely to Jedi philosophy than Sith. But I you and I talked at length in one of the last Star Wars episodes we did about, the spiritual element of the Force and how we don't like it when Jedi are depicted as being able to use the Force however the hell they want, whenever the hell they want, without consequence.
Right.
So initially when I saw that scene, I was getting a little worried at first, but as the scene progressed, I realized, again, they were straddling that line that there is some gray to Ahsoka. And I don't mean gray as in gray Jedi. I mean just morally gray, moral ambiguity. But she's not neutral. They're not trying to put her in the exact midpoint between Jedi and Sith. She's just going a bit further out of Jedi orthodoxy than what many of them do.
Yeah, because I think the Jedi were trying to aim for like perfection, right? Which just isn't possible. But so she goes a little bit further than that, but nothing, but that also makes it a little more dangerous for her. But I think she also has her own fears, which is probably manifested with the child having a lot of fear, right? Because she saw what happened to Anakin, who had a lot of fear and anger, right? Because of that. So
I think that's and she all but references him by name when she initially refuses to teach Grogu because of his fear and his attachment to the Mandalorian. But I also agree with you that there's almost like this unspoken part, and again, they may not be intending this at all. This may be us reading into it, but there is almost like this unspoken part where not only do I fear for him, I'm honestly not sure I'm the person to be training him because of all the stuff we're talking about. I'm not, some sort of enlightened centrist of the Force, between dark and light, but I am definitely stepping a bit closer to the edge of the light than what my former masters, what Yoda and what Obi-Wan would be comfortable with. I'm not at the midpoint, but I'm I'm not as close to the Jedi orthodoxy as would be comfortable. So it may just be a bad combination. This kid's got a lot of fear and anxiety in him. I've got some darkness in me. It's a bad combination because I saw what happened when a well-meaning but flawed teacher taught, quote unquote, the best of us,
Right.
And because again, she knows not only what happened to Anakin. I mean, she fought him as Vader in Star Wars Rebels, so she's got definite firsthand knowledge. But yeah, I just loved the scene. I loved how it was filmed. It was kind of creepy. It was cool. It was well shot, well lit. Filoni is definitely. I mean, I'm not an artistic person, but I imagine it is not the same from directing and executive producing animated TV shows and then going to live action. I have to imagine there are differences. It's not just, indistinguishable. So it's impressive to see just from a cinematographical, perspective that he seems to be much more proficient
Mm-hmm.
than what his resume would suggest, since he doesn't have a lot of live action experience. It was just a very memorably shot, well shot sequence.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Uh,
Yeah.
what did you think of? I mean, we didn't get too deep in the history, but I mean, obviously, the central conflict of the episode was the Mandalorian kind of stumbled on this grudge match between Ahsoka and the Magistrate. So she was the villain of the episode. She had a right hand man played by Michael Bain of I think he was in the original Terminator. I think he was not John Connor, but I think John Connor's dad, if I remember correctly, in the original Terminator movie. And so he's kind of a sci-fi, VIP.
Right. Right.
He was her right hand man, and
Mm-hmm.
the Mandalorian kind of got entangled in that.
Yeah, and it hinted to something that we talked about when the trailer came out, right? Of kind of fear that we had, something that was going to happen to this, may happen to the series, that may pull it too close to major events, right?
Yeah,
Making the scale just blow up.
right. Are you talking about her finding out that the Magistrate was the protege of a certain person?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm sure everyone, all 12 people listening, have watched the episode, but you find out at the very end, after the Magistrate is defeated in single combat by Ahsoka, that she was a protege of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Thrawn, who hasn't been seen since Star Wars Rebels as well, the last season. Quick recap again for those of you who don't know: at the end of Star Wars Rebels season 4, which is the final season, Grand Admiral Thrawn is basically the final villain. He's the big bad of the season, and at the end of that episode, Thrawn is confronted by the Rebels protagonist, Ezra Bridger, who's a Jedi fledgling, and the two of them have a confrontation on the bridge of Thrawn's Star Destroyer, above the planet Lothal, which is the primary setting of Star Wars Rebels, and the Rebels are trying to liberate it from Thrawn and the Empire. And they have a final face-off on the bridge of the Star Destroyer, and believe it or not, these magic space whales, and that's not a euphemism, that's called Purrgil. They are a new addition to the Star Wars canon that they debuted in an early season of Rebels and then showed up at the end. They're basically reinforcements summoned through the Force by Ezra, and they kind of tip the scales in favor of the Rebels. And they entangle Thrawn's Star Destroyer with Thrawn and Ezra still on it, and then they zip out into the unknown regions, and we don't know where the hell they went. And that's why apparently we don't hear from Ezra during the time of the original trilogy. It's why Thrawn, isn't on the board for the Empire during the original trilogy. they were taken off the board, and we don't know what happened to them. In the very, very end of Rebels, Ahsoka and another character in Rebels, a Mandalorian named Sabine, who had the dark saber, if I remember correctly at the time. I could be fudging that. Anyway, they decide that they're going to go off on a journey to try to find Ezra and Thrawn, and that's where the final episode of Rebels left us. So here we are, with Mandalorian taking place, I guess, like 4 or 7 years after Return of the Jedi. I can't remember, but the Empire's gone. It's in shattered remnants, and apparently Ahsoka is still on the hunt for Thrawn. Ezra is not mentioned, so it's possible Ezra was found. It's possible Ezra is dead. It's possible she's trying to find Thrawn to find Ezra, and we don't have any reference to Sabine, the Mandalorian, one of the main characters of Rebels, who joined her on that quest. But there again, it's tying those threads together. Thrawn is apparently still alive, as far as Ahsoka knows, and he's still a threat. And that is interesting. But I do not like, personally, I don't like how it threatens to upset the premise of The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
Because Filoni did this with Rebels. A lot of people liked Rebels, and I was really hyped about it at first. But it was supposed to be a contrast to the Clone Wars, which was this big ensemble, epic story about a galactic war between two galactic, forces, all being puppeteered by Darth Sidious. And it was, it was an epic story, and also a context provider for what happened between Attack of the Clones Episode 2 and Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. And it was this big epic tale. And Rebels was pitched as, this more family, character-driven, small-scale story. The war against the Empire had not formally started, so it was just like this ragtag group, truly ragtag group, fighting the Empire in its own way, far from the scope of Darth Vaders and Grand Moff Tarkins and Emperor Palpatines. And yet, for one reason or another, they really blew the scale out on that thing as the seasons progressed. You got Vader involved, you got Tarkin involved, Thrawn was introduced, the Emperor showed up a couple of times, and I didn't like that. I feel like Star Wars hesitates to do anything other than these big epic dramas. That stuff's great, but it should be broken up by more intimate stories. You can still have great fights, you can still have, spaceship battles, but you don't need a planet killer. You don't need, Han Solo and Darth Vader and Yoda to show up. You don't need all these people. And
sure.
And even this, we're talking about this episode precisely because Ahsoka's here and Thrawn is here. And it threatens to rob attention from the Mandalorian, which is a problem for two reasons. One, it's supposed to be his story. And not that you can't introduce side characters or whatnot, but the focus is no longer going to be on him. Anytime he has to share the screen with Ahsoka, it's going to be like, shut up, Mandalorian. Ahsoka's talking. We don't care about you anymore. As soon as Thrawn steps on the screen, I don't know if we'll care as much about Moff Gideon, even though he's played by the great Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad, because he's Grand Admiral frickin' Thrawn, So I just based, what is it they say about the best indicator of future outcomes is past performance or whatever? And based on that, I'm anxious. I'm a bit nervous about this.
I think you have every right to be, because, to be fair, I don't think they needed to do that. People pretty much enjoyed The Mandalorian as it was going, right? And there were hints that Ahsoka would be dropped in. It's Dave Filoni. Ahsoka's going to be there. But I think they may have pushed it too wide, the scope. And we'll have to see. Maybe this won't happen, right? Maybe they'll just have some cameo appearances, a few sort of like the side characters, only appear once every 7 or 8 episodes. So,
Right.
And then they just make the focus the Mandalorian, which it should be. But I think they have to be very, very careful. And I think Filoni himself knows, or he loves his characters, right?
And he should.
He nerds out over his characters, which is great. I think that's awesome. Ahsoka's a great character. I love Ahsoka. I've always liked her. And but I think that the first season of the show proved that you didn't need to do that, right? It can be its self-contained story that seems grand on the scale that it deals with, but ultimately is very small in the universe, right?
Right. And not everybody needs to be a cousin or an acquaintance of every VIP character, know.
And and it's fine to drop them in there every now and then, like,
sure.
But you got to be very careful because you don't want the show to change from being the Mandalorian to the Ahsoka and that guy in Beskar,
right? Right. Ahsoka and sidekicks. Otherwise, just make an Ahsoka TV show, which I'd gladly watch.
This may be setting up for an Ahsoka TV show.
Yeah, he may be trying a backdoor pilot or something.
Right, because putting Ahsoka in a live action role and seeing how people warm up to her, may be what he's trying to do here.
Right.
But I just hope that it doesn't cost the Mandalorian its own charm.
Right. And side note, because we talked about how great it is, but we haven't drawn nearly enough attention to Rosario Dawson, who portrays the live action Ahsoka. Ashley Eckstein, I think, was the voice actress of Ahsoka during the Clone Wars and Rebels, and she did a great job. Rosario Dawson has been like a fan selection for Ahsoka. I mean, going back years. I mean, before the Mandalorian was even conceived, people talked about, Rosario Dawson should play Ahsoka if Ahsoka's ever brought to live action. She certainly favors her physically. And Rosario Dawson's a great actress. She really is. She's a great, compelling actress, and she carries the athleticism and the strength of the character very well. In fact, one of the most memorable, probably the most memorable Rosario Dawson movie for me, she played a character, kind of the love interest or the tritagonist in The Rundown, which is a 2003 action comedy movie with The Rock. It was like The Rock's first, Dwayne Johnson's first big blockbuster movie. It's Sean William Scott from American Pie.
Scott. Yeah, I know that one.
Christopher Walken, great film.
Right.
I mean, like not great like Martin Scorsese great, but I mean like highly entertaining, very funny, great action scenes. And she's very badass in that movie, and she just exudes a quiet, steely resolve. Which when I saw her as Ahsoka here, it took me right back to The Rundown 17 years ago. And I think she'll do a very credible job of playing the quiet, thoughtful Ahsoka, and also the vaguely cocky. I mean, because she has some things in common with Anakin, her former master, and that's one of them, kind of a spitfire tendency, and I think she'll straddle that line very well. So she does a really good job. But yeah, I do not want Ahsoka to overshadow this show, because she doesn't, it's great that she was a main character in Clone Wars and she became a main character in Rebels, but I think Ahsoka merits her own show, and I think she's certainly earned it. As long as there's a story to tell, she has earned as much as any character, male or female, has earned the right to transcend from supporting character to central, truly central, the main character of a show. Ahsoka has more than earned it. So I think it would be to the Mandalorian's detriment as a series. It would certainly have my interest, right? But as a series, as a whole, I think it'd be a bad idea to just kind of put her in the rotating cast here. If she's going to be in this, then have her serve her purpose and get out for her sake and the Mandalorian's sake, or give her her own show if you have more stuff to do with her. Don't just make her the we're just going to make her the second or third billing in
Sure.
every TV show that ever comes out ever. Don't, I mean,
Well, she deserves more than that, frankly.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. And if they need to bring her in for anything, gosh, I don't mind once or twice per season having a phone call asking how do you force change a diaper. That's fine. That doesn't bother me because that doesn't change the scope, right?
Right.
So that wouldn't bother me. But yeah, I agree. I think she really deserves, her character deserves more than that. And I think the actress did an excellent job in this show, in this episode, excuse me.
Well, it's funny, actually, as a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it. So I don't know. Did you watch Daredevil?
Briefly.
Like a few episodes. The Netflix TV show?
Yeah. I watched a few episodes.
So she's in Daredevil. She plays like she's an EMT or a nurse named Claire. She's in Daredevil. She's in Luke Cage. She's in Iron Fist.
Oh, okay.
She's like so what's funny is, now that I think about Rosario Dawson, is, so don't make Ahsoka the equivalent of Rosario Dawson's other big Disney franchise character, where she just rotates in for 3 episodes in this series, 3 episodes in this series. She, again, like, just not to beat that horse into glue, but she merits her own thing, right? If you love this character so much and you think there's story to tell, and that's really the key. If there's story to tell, then tell it as its own thing. So yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen. Name dropping Thrawn also, again, I could see it possible that Thrawn is working with Moff Gideon, but I don't know.
He could be like the villain that's never revealed, right? They may not even find him or do anything with him in the show. So it's fine to name drop him.
Right. But yeah, if you bring Ahsoka and Thrawn into this is, you might as well just change the name of the show, because nobody's going to care about the Mandalorian anymore. It's going to be called Hey, look, it's the Ahsoka and Thrawn show, DeLorean.
Sounds like one of those late night TV shows, the Ahsoka and Thrawn show.
Right, featuring the Mandalorian until we get tired of him. But it also, I mean, like you and I discussed with a friend offline recently. I mean, again, if the show is, again, I don't think the Mandalorian as a protagonist is the most memorable or interesting Star Wars protagonist. I think I think the stoic man in a helmet is an interesting thing, but it can get stale very quickly.
He almost seems like a first-person shooter protagonist.
Right. He's the Master Chief for all intents and purposes. And the Master Chief's an iconic character, but he's not, he's not like a protagonist out of Cormac McCarthy or, whatever. He's not like multi-dimensional and nuanced. And if the character is such that you feel the need to pad the cast with the Ahsokas and Thrawns to divert attention from your protagonist because there's not much there, then you should focus on making your protagonist more multidimensional. I mean, and I say that as a huge fan of Pedro Pascal, the Mandalorian's actor. He's an incredible actor. So that's the other thing. What I'm just, I'm wondering if maybe it's reflexive. Like, man, we really need to inject some more substance into the Mandalorian. So let's just drop Ahsoka. Let's just drop Thrawn. Because there's not a lot there.
I think they can deal more with his character, and I think they set up for that a bit. And with some other characters from the Clone Wars that could be a part of the show without affecting the scope too much. With what was her name? Oh shoot, the other Mandalorians,
Bo-Katan.
Yeah, Bo-Katan. Thank you.
Oh my God, and we forgot about Boba. Boba from the first episode or second episode.
Yeah,
so I mean, there's another character, right? So,
but I think there's a lot of opportunity with him once we found out that he was in like this kind of restrictive cult of Mandalorians. That his character may get some growth by working with other Mandalorians who aren't part of that, right? So he may eventually remove the helmet. That's certainly what the actor wants to do. So
well, and it absolutely. It would be more. It would be more for his benefit. And because I quite frankly I forgot about Bo-Katan. But Bo-Katan was another She certainly wasn't as popular as Ahsoka, but she was a character that originated in the Clone Wars, and she was very memorable. And actually, the lady who portrays her, Katie Sackhoff from Battlestar Galactica, was also her voice actress in the Clone Wars. So there's continuity there. But she would be more, if you're going to shoehorn anybody from the Clone Wars or anybody from the extant show into a central role in the Mandalorian, then it would probably be the other, high profile
Mandalorians.
That's a great point. Very good point. Which I hadn't even considered, quite frankly. But yeah, so again, I know we're spinning tires here, but that's just you and I share that fear. Hopefully that does not happen.
Yeah, and I think the other big part of the show that we can talk about, I think the other big, just the big portion of the show is just the fight, right? The duel, not only between Mandalorian and the guard, I can't remember his name.
Lang.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also between Ahsoka and Morgan, Magistrate Morgan.
Yeah. Morgan Elsbeth. Yeah, so I am amused. You want to talk about hyperbole, where the Mandalorian says, look, she's got a small army. And indeed, it is small. It's like 12 people, maybe. And one guy's the janitor. They just put a gun in his hands. Yeah.
To be fair, they had some robots that were some fighting robots.
I was counting them. 12 people, including the 2 droids. But yeah,
they're supposed to be HK units or something like that.
They are, and it's interesting you brought that up. They are HK units, which is a great little Legends throwback. Easter egg, from KOTOR. But what I didn't know, but I happened to see it when I just visited the Star Wars website like a day or two ago. If you squint, the seal or the symbol on the HK unit is of Thrawn's fleet from Star Wars Rebels. So,
oh really?
Yeah. So it's not just a name drop. The implication is, he is providing, like he is directly involved. The implication seems to be with Elsbeth as magistrate, that he's providing her troops and protection and whatnot. It indicates that it's not just that she knows his whereabouts. They still have a patronage relationship. Elsbeth and Thrawn does. Which would imply that Thrawn will be more hands-on, or they will be more hands-on with portraying Thrawn at some point. But the fight was great. I mean, again, Star Wars knows how to do memorable action scenes. I will say the tension there's not tension so far with me with the Mandalorian, except the rare fight with Moff Gideon or the initial fight with Ahsoka, because the Beskar is, for all intents and purposes, invulnerable. I mean, at least
so far, yeah. Other than grenades and stuff that will like liquefy his insides, even in the armor, he's had no issues. I mean, he even held off behind a wall.
Right? No, that's what I'm saying. Like, he even held off when Ahsoka sneaks attacks him in the wilderness. He's able to fend her off, just with his gauntlets, his arms, holding off the lightsabers. And
as we saw with the staff, apparently they are very resistant to lightsabers.
Right. And that's that's okay. I don't have a problem with that, but he's covered in it head to toe, and he's outfitted with a flamethrower and a jetpack and a missile launcher and all this stuff. So when he's getting into fights with people, even if the people he's up against are as skilled as he is, or indeed more skilled, unless they're in comparable armor or they have a weapon that will neutralize the armor, the show doesn't provide any reason why he just doesn't walk out into the middle of he's, and just tank all the shots and end the fight in 10 seconds as opposed to 10 minutes. That's one thing I don't like. I do not like invincible protagonists.
And I think it's made worse by the fact that all of the normal shooting villains just line up in a row and start shooting at him as he's walking towards them.
Yeah, they've really embraced that stormtroopers can't hit crap trope, which I loathe. I loathe that trope. That just FYI again for people. I mean, sidebar, this bit of a soapbox here. The dialogue from the original trilogy clearly meant to indicate that stormtroopers were effective. Not that they were all world-class marksmen, but that they knew how to use a gun. Like, there were
Right.
references made to their accuracy. They actually did really well against the non-named protagonists, right? I mean, because plot armor is a thing, you know. It's littered all throughout fiction of, you know, evil henchmen or even arch villains, you know, not taking out main characters even when they have them dead to rights, because that would be the end of the story, right? Even if it has no
Right. Right.
in-universe justification, they'll gloat, they'll monologue, they'll toy with, you know, Deus Ex Machina, like all sorts of tropes come out of nowhere to save the protagonist from certain death. And stormtroopers in the original trilogy, the only time they screwed up is when they were shooting at somebody in the main credits. That's it. Other than that, I mean, they mowed down rebels and everything else left, right, and center. Stormtroopers were not meant to be ineffective. Not the story wouldn't make any sense that way, right? The Empire is supposed to not only be the dominant government, it's supposed to be the
Yeah.
most powerful military in the history of the galaxy, and so its
Hmm.
stormtroopers should be effective.
Right.
But there again, they lean way too hard into it.
Sure. And I think that some of the invincible armor trope could be mitigated a bit if the stormtroopers and the other villains, you know, the regular Joes, were a little bit more tactical and knew they couldn't shoot the armor directly, so tried to blind them or you know, something.
Right.
And it didn't work out, but they tried, you
Or
know.
if you're gonna have him be an invincible armor, which I
That's
don't
what I'm
think is a good
talking about.
idea,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know, you could have them hit him every single time. It just okay. Well, it's just the blasters are insufficient to penetrate, but that's no matter what, they shouldn't be leaning into that trope for the reasons
Hmm.
you identify, and even also for if the guy basically can't be killed by conventional means, then show how badass the stormtroopers are by having them hit him every time. It's just not going to work, right?
Right.
But it just creates problems like that end standoff between him and Lang, you know, where Lang starts to feel the winds, you know, turn against him. And I was actually disappointed with that outcome, you know, where he puts the blaster down. I thought, okay, we might see a recurring presence of him or whatnot. But nope, he stupidly goes for the holdout blaster to try to catch the Mandalorian off guard.
Happens every time, yeah.
But again, the Mandalorian's in invincible armor, so even if you hit him, what's it gonna? You're basically
Yeah, but
in a t-shirt and shorts,
sure.
and this guy's in, you know, he's basically a walking tank.
Which thus far the series has, you know, pretty much everybody knows Beskar armor, right?
Right,
Everybody knows that Beskar steel is like
right,
impenetrable,
right.
unmeltable, you know. So, and he seemed like a pretty intelligent or at least crafty type of
Yeah.
person.
Well, I
So
mean,
why
the
wouldn't
move
he just
itself was crafty. I mean, that was,
right?
you know, I wish he'd have just dropped the blaster and walked off, because that would have been interesting, because that's not, you know, it's atypical for Star Wars villains. Certainly mercenaries, they tend to go, you know, stupidly, even though they have no reason to. They'll die on hills they shouldn't. But yeah, he seemed seasoned and crafty enough. In fact, I think the Mandalorian said repeatedly, talked about how he seems ex-military, knows what he's doing. You know, this guy was identified as a threat, and yet he almost committed suicide by Mando. So um, that's a shame. Too bad we won't see any more of Michael Biehn. Um, then, of course, he had the real title fight between Ahsoka and Morgan.
Which
Um,
kind of played out like what, like a it seemed like I think it just the whole episode seemed like a Kurosawa movie, right?
yeah, yeah, it did. And so it's funny because I remember, um, I know some people online had issues with that fight. Surprisingly, I didn't. I've had fights like I remember watching season 7 of the Clone Wars and having a huge problem with how well Ahsoka fared against Darth Maul, who should have been well outside her league. Sorry. No matter how good she is, you know, he's a prodigy and experienced and trained by the best. And, you know, he's got 20 years of fighting experience on her. She's a teenager, and even if she's a prodigy, which she is, he just blows her out of the water in terms of experience. So even all things being even, he has advantages she doesn't. So he should have dominated the fight obviously, from start to finish. I hated that fight. But this fight didn't bother me because Morgan was clearly very skilled, right? In fact, I think you and I thought she might be an inquisitor, especially when the word master was used. She knew how to use the Beskar spear, but I never felt like Ahsoka was really in any danger. Like they didn't dumb her down. What's the word I want? I think that if Ahsoka was really on the ropes, which, I mean, again, Morgan did very well against her. I think he even disarmed her, and I think it was legitimate. I think she's that good. But Ahsoka is still a telekinetic telepath martial artist. You know what I mean? Like she had,
right.
There was no way she was going to die in that fight. She may have been disarmed, in which case she'd have just lifted her hand and put Morgan on her butt, you know, and took the spear from her. There was no way Ahsoka was going to die in that fight. So I didn't feel like it was some sort of weird plot-induced stupidity wormhole to try to...
You can still be, you know, outskilled and
right.
with your weapon,
right,
and never have any chance of losing a fight, you know.
Right. Well, especially because she's not fighting to kill. She needs information from her, whereas Morgan presumably was fighting to kill Ahsoka.
Or at least fighting for her life in her
right.
mind, maybe.
Right. Which, again, so it's interesting. We want formidable villains. We want villains to have the upper hand. This was one of those situations where that need had to be balanced against the fact that Ahsoka, as a trained Jedi, had to be the toughest person on the field, hero or villain, unless you had an Inquisitor in your pocket or a Sith Lord or something. I don't want some random evil magistrate unless we have a really good reason, like she's force sensitive or whatever, to be able to outmatch Ahsoka in a fight. So those various story needs have to be balanced, and I think they did a good job of it. I think it was very clear. Look, Ahsoka might have a tough fight in the actual sword fighting because this lady's just that good, but Ahsoka was never in any real danger of dying. As soon as she needed to dial the you know what I mean, to ratchet it up a bit, she would just yank the thing out of her hand using the Force.
You know, I just thought of something that was pretty funny.
What's that?
So you remember when she pressed the outside button that just opens the door? Totally useless defensively, by the way.
Right. ADT security really didn't do well for that.
I was highly... I just thought of this. It would have been funny. She opens the door.
Yeah.
Cal Kestis.
Oh, yeah. From Jedi Fallen Order. That lady has been looking for Cal Kestis in every doorway in Star Wars, in my mind, for 10 years. We really need to do a Jedi Fallen Order thing, because that was one of the most fun games, Star Wars games I've played in the last 10 years. But anyway, yes, that would be hilarious if that happened. And then it's like, shut up, this isn't your fight, you know, and presses the button again. You got the wrong room. Damn it. All right, sorry about that.
Every single time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So on the whole, again, for me, I mean, that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. I'm looking forward to the next episode, because the Mandalorian and Grogu, or Gorgu,
they're bringing back some, or they're
Grogu,
Grogu, something like that. Yeah.
They are going to the planet Tython, which is also being reintroduced
from Legends. Yeah. So Legends, it was the home world of the Jedi, right? Or at least the first temple or whatever.
Yeah, it was the equivalent of what's canon called Moraband, which is the Sith home world. It was basically a recanonized Korriban. Tython is the Jedi equivalent. It's where, in Legends, it was the ancient Jedi homeworld. In canon, the ancient Jedi homeworld is the island that Luke is on in Star Wars The Last Jedi, Ahch-To. So we don't know what Tython's history will be, other than it has an ancient Jedi temple. And apparently Grogu will undergo a vision quest. And that certainly has implications. Yeah. So in a nutshell, most memorable episode so far. I'm interested in seeing where it's going, but I sense a disturbance in the Force, pun intended, with Filoni's habits regarding Ahsoka in particular, but his characters in general.
He just can't help himself sometimes.
Yeah,
maybe he'll prove us wrong, which if he does, fine. If he's just kind of pushing for an Ahsoka show, that's great. Just don't step all over the Mandalorian show. Doing it. But as far as the episode itself, I'd give it a solid B-. Right.
Oh yeah, I mean, I might even go so far as a B+. I mean, especially again for Star Wars fare, it was entertaining. It was consistently exciting. I wasn't bored at any point. I'd watch it again. And I was really excited to see Ahsoka. And I think I'm interested in the implications to come. So by any reasonable metric, this episode was a success, certainly for me. So
I agree.
All right. Well, if you've got nothing else, I think it might be time to wrap up. We appreciate everybody who's listened. Our ever expanding audience of I think 12 people now.
Yeah, we're close to retirement already.
We are. We really are. We did a couple of Crusader Kings episodes and stuff like that. We've got some other things in the pipe. The next episode, I'll just go ahead and say, Bardikins and I will be covering my favorite all-time TV show. It may become a regular thing or maybe a once in a blue moon thing, but the next episode will be discussing that. I'm excited about that. It will not be Star Wars related. But again, we appreciate the support. We hope to have regular content again, perhaps even more frequently. And if you like what you hear, leave a comment, like and subscribe. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, thanks a lot. We really enjoy doing this, and we hope you guys enjoy listening as well.
Indeed. All right, I think that's it, guys. Fictionology is out. Have a good evening.
See you on the next one.